Picture this. You're a 19-year-old American soldier. Yesterday, you were eating mom's apple pie and fresh steaks. Today, you're staring at a bowl of watery soup with inch-long worms crawling through it. And that's if you're lucky. What I'm about to reveal will completely change how you think about survival, human endurance, and the true cost of freedom. Because the foods American prisoners actually ate during World War II weren't just disgusting, they were literally calculated to keep men alive while slowly killing them. And here's the shocking part. It wasn't just about starvation. It was about psychological warfare through food. The Japanese and Germans knew exactly what they were doing. So buckle up, because we're diving deep into the most disturbing dietary nightmare in modern history, and I guarantee you'll never look at your dinner the same way again. But first, if you're ready to uncover the brutal truth that history books barely mention, smash that like button. Let's go. Before we dive into the horrifying details, you need to understand the scale we're talking about. Over 130,000 American servicemen became prisoners of war during World War II. That's more than the entire population of cities like Syracuse or Rockford. These men were scattered across two main theaters, and the difference between them was literally life and death through food. In German camps, called stalags, Americans faced systematic starvation with calculated precision. In Japanese camps, they encountered something far worse: deliberate nutritional torture designed to break their spirits while keeping them technically alive for slave labor. The mortality rates tell the story. In German camps, 3% of American POWs died. Horrible, but survivable. In Japanese camps, over 30% never came home. That's 1 in 3 Americans who died primarily from starvation and food-related diseases. Now let me show you exactly what they were eating and why some of these meals were more terrifying than bullets. The German potato death sentence. Let's start with what sounds like the better option: German POW camps. But here's what'll blow your mind. The Germans had literally calculated the exact minimum calories needed to keep an American soldier alive, but too weak to escape. This wasn't random cruelty. This was scientific starvation. Their formula was diabolically simple. Each American POW would receive exactly 9 pounds of potatoes per week, augmented by 5 pounds of bread, usually black and moldy, and 2.5 pounds of cabbage. Supplemental rations included 7 ounces of sausage if they were lucky, and small amounts of sugar, salt, barley, and fake coffee made from acorns. That sounds like a lot until you realize that's it. That's all the food for an entire week. No variety, no proper nutrition, just enough starch to keep you breathing. But here's where it gets really twisted. German documents from 1945 show that camp commandants had explicit orders to keep POWs alive but weakened. One German official actually wrote, the plan was to keep them alive, yet weakened enough that they wouldn't attempt escape. Private Ara Dedeyan, captured during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, described his typical day. For breakfast, we got 1 slice of black bread and hot water for coffee, but no coffee. For dinner, it was another slice of bread and a soup that was mostly hot water with some turnip and cabbage parts in it. If we were real lucky, we might have gotten a piece of a potato in this soup. This 5-foot 4-inch soldier went from his normal weight down to 114 pounds. He lost 50 pounds of muscle and fat. Some prisoners lost 80 pounds, and some lost their lives. But here's the most disturbing part. This weight loss was documented and tracked. German guards weighed prisoners regularly, not out of concern, but to calculate the minimum food needed to keep them functional as slave laborers. The psychological impact was devastating. One POW wrote in his diary, "We talk about food constantly. Every conversation somehow turns to meals we remember from home." Jimmy spent 3 hours yesterday describing his mother's pot roast in perfect detail. We could taste every bite he described, and it worked. American POWs were so malnourished that even thinking about escape required energy they simply didn't have. The potato-based diet, while keeping them technically alive, stripped them of the strength needed for resistance. But there's a scientific reason why this diet was chosen. Potatoes are actually a remarkable source of protein, amino acids, and iodine. Their skins contain vitamin C to prevent scurvy. The Germans understood that this specific combination would prevent immediate death while ensuring long-term weakness. Compare this to the death camps, where prisoners received even less and died within months. The German POW diet was designed for exactly what they achieved, keeping Americans alive but broken for the duration of the war. By late 1944, when German supply lines were being bombed constantly, even these meager rations became inconsistent. The camp commandants reverted to what one survivor called the diet of the death camps, calculated to keep a person alive for about 8 months before malnutrition claimed them. But if you think eating moldy bread and watery potato soup was bad, wait until you hear about the one thing that kept thousands of Americans from complete despair. Because what came in those wooden boxes, marked with red crosses, was literally the difference between hope and suicide for many prisoners. Packages of hope, the Red Cross lifeline. Picture being starved for months, your ribs showing through your skin, your mind constantly focused on food, and suddenly receiving a wooden box marked with a red cross. For American POWs in German camps, these packages weren't just food, they were proof that America hadn't forgotten them. The American Red Cross Prisoner of War Food Package number 10 was a standardized box, 10 inches by 10 inches by 4.5 inches, weighing exactly 11 pounds. But what was inside seemed like pure luxury to starving men. Canned corned beef, actual meat, chocolate bars, often Cadbury dairy milk with fruit and nuts, real coffee, not the acorn water the Germans provided, canned salmon, cheese, powdered milk, and biscuits. But it wasn't just food. These packages contained cigarettes, which became currency in the camps, toilet paper, soap, and even sewing supplies. One POW described opening his first Red Cross package. "I held that chocolate bar and just stared at it for 10 minutes. I couldn't believe it was real. When I finally took a bite, I started crying. I hadn't tasted real chocolate in 8 months. The impact went beyond nutrition. These packages represented a lifeline to home, to civilization, to the belief that someone was fighting for their freedom. POWs would carefully ration the contents, making a single chocolate bar last for days, savoring each small piece. Hermann Kranman turned 21 while imprisoned in a German camp. His fellow prisoners, who affectionately called him Junior because of his young age, took dental powder from a Red Cross medical kit and made him a birthday cake so he could blow out a candle on his 21st birthday behind barbed wire. His daughter later said this story exemplified how these packages maintained humanity in the most inhumane circumstances. But here's the cruel reality. Prisoners were supposed to receive 1 package per week. In practice, distribution was erratic and often interrupted. Sometimes months would go by without packages, and toward the end of the war, German guards would frequently steal the contents, leaving only bread for the starving Americans. The theft became so systematic that American camp representatives had to maintain emergency stores just to make up for what German personnel stole. One POW reported, "The guards would open our packages right in front of us and take whatever they wanted. They'd eat our chocolate while we watched, then hand us the empty wrapper." By 1944, with Allied bombing disrupting supply lines, the packages became even more irregular. Some prisoners of war captured late in the war reported receiving no Red Cross contact at all. These men faced the German starvation diet with no supplementation whatsoever. The desperation for food led to incredible creativity. POWs would trade cigarettes from Red Cross packages for anything edible. One documented case shows a prisoner trading 50 cigarettes for 4.5 pounds of onions from local farmers, then eating the onions raw like apples because he was so desperately hungry for vitamins. In some camps, prisoners pooled their Red Cross rations and created elaborate trading systems. They'd use tin cans from the packages to make cooking utensils and primitive ovens. Some groups established restaurants where they'd combine rations to create variety in their diet. The psychological impact of these packages cannot be overstated. Mail that sometimes accompanied them provided news from home, updates on the war, and proof that families were still waiting for their return. Without these packages, many POWs later admitted they might not have survived mentally, even if they survived physically. But if you think missing Red Cross packages was the worst thing that could happen to an American POW, you haven't heard anything yet. Because in Japanese camps, Red Cross packages were often completely forbidden, and what prisoners ate instead will haunt you for the rest of your life. The Japanese Rice Death March. Now we enter the true nightmare. Japanese POW camps weren't just about starvation, they were about systematically breaking the human spirit through food degradation while extracting maximum slave labor before death. Here's what will blow your mind. American prisoners in Japanese camps received approximately 700 calories per day. To put that in perspective, the average person needs 2,000 to 2,500 calories just to survive without any physical activity. These men were doing hard labor in tropical heat on less than 1/3 of survival rations. But the calories weren't even the worst part. It was what those calories consisted of. The staple food was called lugao, a watery rice gruel that contained ingredients designed to disgust and demoralize as much as feed. This wasn't regular rice. This was rice filled with dirt, silt, and inch-long weevils, live worms crawling through the gruel. Fish heads floated in the watery mixture, their dead eyes staring up at prisoners forced to consume them. Rotten vegetables that had been discarded elsewhere were thrown into the mix. One Bataan Death March survivor described it perfectly. "We got a green concoction that was made from the tops of potato plants. I don't think it had much nourishment in it. It kind of colored the water green. You could chew it for months and you couldn't break it down. The rice was filled with silt and worms. You'd get about 2/3 of a mess kit, a couple of times a day. But here's the most horrifying part. This wasn't incompetence or supply shortages. Japanese records show they were conducting systematic experiments on American POWs. They were literally documenting how little food they could provide while keeping prisoners alive for slave labor. Private Gene Boyd, captured in the Philippines, reported, "The Japs weighed us every week. They were keeping records on how much food was needed to keep us alive and working." This wasn't feeding prisoners. This was human experimentation. The Japanese had a philosophy that guided their treatment of POWs. A prisoner who does not work should not eat. This meant if you were too sick to perform slave labor, your already minimal food ration was cut by 1/3. It was literally a death sentence through starvation. The results were catastrophic. In July 1942 alone, 799 American prisoners died in Cabanatuan Camp in the Philippines. That's 26 Americans dying every single day, primarily from starvation and diseases caused by malnutrition. For perspective, that's more American deaths in 1 month than many entire battles. The lugao caused specific medical horrors. The rice-only diet led to beriberi, which causes neurological damage and heart failure. Scurvy from vitamin C deficiency caused internal bleeding and teeth falling out. Pellagra from lack of proper protein led to mental deterioration and painful skin conditions. But perhaps most cruel was the psychological torture through food. Prisoners were forced to watch Japanese guards eat proper meals while they consumed worm-filled gruel. One survivor wrote, "They would cook fish and vegetables right outside our barracks, making sure we could smell it while we ate our lugao with worms." The portion sizes were calculated to maximize suffering. 2/3 of a mess kit, twice a day. That's roughly 1 cup of food every 12 hours for men doing hard physical labor in tropical heat. Their bodies began consuming muscle tissue for energy within weeks. Dr. John Bumgarner, an Army physician who was also a POW, documented the medical effects. "I could have easily predicted the rise of the death rate in view of the deficient diet and lack of medication. By the middle of June, the grisly procession of dead had grown to average 20 deaths per day. 20 men who had endured the terrible ordeal of Bataan, who were 10,000 miles from home, and who then died in the most miserable circumstances imaginable." The Japanese understood exactly what they were doing. They weren't just starving American bodies, they were destroying American minds. Many POWs became so obsessed with food that they would spend hours describing meals from home in perfect detail, creating elaborate mental feasts to escape their reality. But what happened when prisoners became so desperate that the definition of food became completely flexible? Will show you the absolute extremes of human survival instinct. When hunger makes everything edible, when you're literally dying of starvation, watching your body consume its own muscle tissue, the definition of food becomes terrifyingly flexible. What American POWs resorted to eating in Japanese camps shows the absolute limits of human desperation and survival instinct. In the Philippines, captured Americans quickly learned that anything moving was potentially edible. Rats became a prized delicacy, fought over by grown men who had once been too polite to ask for seconds at dinner. Prisoners would fashion traps from scraps of metal and cloth, spending hours trying to catch rodents that might provide a few ounces of actual protein. Grasshoppers, beetles, and any other insects became regular parts of their diet. One POW described the process. You'd catch grasshoppers and remove the legs and wings. The body had some protein. It wasn't about taste anymore. It was about staying alive one more day. But even insects were luxury compared to what came next. Prisoners resorted to eating tree bark, stripping it from any available wood, and chewing it like cattle trying to extract any possible nutrition. Grass, weeds, and leaves became food sources, though they provided virtually no calories and often caused digestive problems. The most heartbreaking scenes involved competition for scraps. One survivor wrote, "I watched grown men, soldiers who had faced enemy fire, fight over a single grain of rice that had fallen on the floor. We would get on our hands and knees looking for any crumb that might have been dropped during the pathetic meal distribution." Perhaps most disturbing was what prisoners called salvage eating. They would search through Japanese garbage, looking for potato peels, fish bones with tiny bits of meat still attached, or vegetable scraps that had been discarded. These became precious finds worth trading for. Water became almost as precious as food. Prisoners would drink their own urine to prevent dehydration, despite knowing it provided no nutrition and could actually be harmful. Rainwater was collected in makeshift containers made from cans, and fights would break out over access to these water sources. The psychological impact of this desperation was devastating. Many prisoners later reported that the shame of fighting over scraps was almost worse than the hunger itself. These were men who had been raised with manners, who had fought for American ideals, reduced to animalistic behavior just to survive. But perhaps most tragic was the mental obsession with food from home. Prisoners would spend hours, sometimes entire days, describing meals they remembered. One POW's diary contains a 12-page detailed description of his grandmother's Sunday dinner, written from memory while he was eating lugao with worms. "I can taste every bite of her pot roast," he wrote. "The way the potatoes absorbed the gravy, the sweetness of the carrots, the perfect seasoning. It's more real to me than this place. Sometimes I think if I concentrate hard enough, I can actually taste it and feel full for a few minutes." These food fantasies became a form of mental escape, but they also intensified the torture of their current reality. Some prisoners reported that thinking about food from home made their hunger even more unbearable. The contrast with German camps is stark. Where Americans in stalags could organize sports, theatrical performances, and escape attempts, prisoners in Japanese camps were too malnourished to do anything but focus on basic survival. The difference wasn't just cultural, it was nutritional. Potatoes provide essential vitamins and protein. Rice with worms provides carbohydrates and parasites. Japanese guards seem to take pleasure in the prisoners' desperation. Multiple accounts describe guards eating proper meals directly in front of starving Americans, making exaggerated displays of enjoying their food while prisoners watched with hollow, desperate eyes. Some prisoners attempted to supplement their diet through theft, but the punishments were severe. Being caught stealing food could result in beatings, further reduction in rations, or execution. The risk-reward calculation became a daily mental torture. Is a possible bite of real food worth the risk of death? But what's most remarkable is how some prisoners managed to maintain their humanity despite this degradation. Stories emerge of prisoners sharing their meager rations with sick comrades, knowing it might cost them their own lives. These acts of selflessness in the face of starvation show something unbreakable in the human spirit. However, the physical cost was enormous. By 1945, liberated American POWs from Japanese camps were walking skeletons, many weighing less than 90 pounds. Their bodies had consumed muscle, organs had shrunk, and many suffered permanent damage from malnutrition that would affect them for the rest of their lives. But liberation was coming, and when it finally arrived, the contrast between what these men had endured and what they chose to eat as free men tells us everything about the psychological scars left by their ordeal. Liberation, the first taste of freedom. When liberation finally came, the contrast between American POWs freed from German camps versus those freed from Japanese camps was shocking and heartbreaking. But what these men chose to eat as their first meals of freedom reveals the deep psychological scars left by years of systematic starvation. American forces liberating German stalags found prisoners who were thin, certainly malnourished, but who could walk, talk, and even joke. They were hungry, but recognizably human. These men, when offered their choice of food, typically asked for simple American staples: white bread, milk, steak, or their mother's cooking. But American forces liberating Japanese camps encountered something far more disturbing: walking skeletons who could barely speak, some weighing less than 90 pounds, their eyes hollow, and their bodies consuming themselves to stay alive. Many couldn't even hold down solid food initially and had to be fed intravenously. The most telling moment came aboard hospital ships returning liberated POWs to America. One group of former prisoners from Japanese camps was served rice as part of their meal. The men's reaction was immediate and violent. They threw the rice overboard and refused to eat anything containing rice. Some became physically ill just at the sight of it. "I never want to see rice again," one survivor told a Navy nurse. "The smell makes me want to vomit. All I can think about are the worms crawling through it." This wasn't just preference, it was trauma. Many survivors developed lifelong food anxieties and eating disorders that affected them for decades. Some would never eat Asian food again. Others became obsessive about food waste, unable to throw away even spoiled food because of their memories of desperation. But there were also moments of profound joy. Herman Cranman, the young POW who had celebrated his 21st birthday with a cake made from dental powder, was given a real piece of white bread by a Red Cross volunteer. His son later described the moment. "Dad held that piece of bread like it was made of gold. He took tiny bites and chewed each one slowly, savoring something that the rest of us take completely for granted." The medical challenges were enormous. Liberated POWs couldn't immediately eat normal portions or rich foods. Their digestive systems had adapted to starvation rations. They had to be gradually reintroduced to proper nutrition over weeks or months. Some never fully recovered their ability to process normal amounts of food. Many survivors reported that their first real meal, often at military hospitals in the Philippines or on hospital ships, was emotionally overwhelming. One POW wrote, "When they brought me a plate with actual meat, vegetables, and potatoes, I started crying and couldn't stop. I kept touching the food to make sure it was real." After 3 years of Lugao, this seemed like a miracle. The psychological impact extended beyond the survivors themselves. Family members were often shocked by the condition of their returned loved ones. Many wives and mothers had to learn to cook all over again, preparing foods that their traumatized family members could actually eat. American women who married former POWs quickly learned never to serve turnips, cabbage, or rice in any visible form. The smell of these foods could trigger panic attacks or violent reactions in men who had survived on them during captivity. Perhaps most poignantly, many survivors became obsessive about feeding others. They would cook elaborate meals for their families, always preparing too much food, unable to believe that there would be enough. Some kept emergency food supplies hidden throughout their homes for the rest of their lives. The contrast in recovery between POWs from different camps was stark. Those who had survived German stalags, while certainly traumatized, were generally able to return to normal eating patterns within months. Those who survived Japanese camps often struggled with food-related issues for the rest of their lives. One statistic tells the story. Of the roughly 22,000 Americans captured by Japanese forces in the Philippines, only about 15,000 returned home alive. That's a death rate of over 30%. By comparison, Allied POWs held by Germans suffered a death rate of about 3%. But perhaps the most remarkable thing is what these survivors accomplished after returning home. These men, who had been reduced to fighting over grains of rice, who had eaten worms and grass to survive, came home and built the America we know today. They married, raised families, started businesses, and rarely spoke about their experiences. The lesson they carried with them wasn't just about the horrors of war, but about the value of simple things we take for granted. As one survivor put it, "After you've eaten lugao with worms for 3 years, a peanut butter sandwich tastes like the finest meal ever prepared. I never complain about food now, ever." The legacy that lives on. The story of what American POWs ate during World War II isn't just historical curiosity, it's a testament to human resilience and a reminder of the true cost of freedom. These 130,000 men didn't just survive imprisonment, they survived systematic attempts to break their spirits through the most basic human need: food. The next time you complain about your dinner, remember Private Ara Dedeyan losing 50 pounds on German potato soup. Remember Herman Kranman celebrating his 21st birthday with a cake made from dental powder. Remember the unnamed Americans who threw rice overboard rather than eat it again, carrying the trauma of worm-filled lugao for the rest of their lives. These men faced horrors we can barely imagine, survived on foods that would disgust us, and came home to build the America we inherited. They didn't just endure, they overcame. They didn't just survive, they thrived. Their story reminds us that freedom isn't free, and that the simple act of choosing what to eat for dinner is a privilege paid for by those who ate worms, grass, and potato peels so we wouldn't have to. If this opened your eyes to a part of history you never knew, hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories that reveal the true price of the world we live in today. Drop a comment with the most shocking fact you learned. I read every single one. And if you think this story was intense, wait until you see what's coming next. The story of what American military nurses ate while hiding in Japanese-occupied territory will absolutely blow your mind. We're talking about survival decisions that make everything you just heard seem tame by comparison. Thanks for watching, and never forget, the price of freedom was paid in more ways than we ever imagined.